Life's a wreck.
So, James, how I like to start any interview that I do, and this is from, just excessive years of therapy, that, my therapist has always, made me do kind of a check-in before you sit down and really get into things. So, yeah, I just kind of want to know, like, how's your day been? How are you feeling? Just, yeah, like, how are you?
Cool. No, it's a good question. I think I'm good. I have had a busy morning as I tend to most days. The days start early. I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, so the days start extremely early, and then there's
Hmm.
lots of shouting and running around and panicking and people screaming at each other, and then suddenly at 7:45, it's silence, and then suddenly the stress of all the things I need to do in the day
Everything comes
start.
crashing in.
That's it. It all starts kind of piling in. But overall, considering the world we're living in right now and the uncertainty and the fear and everything else, I am doing pretty well.
I'm happy to do that. How's everything been, the transition with having the kids in the house and school being on sometimes, off sometimes? How's that all been on you and the wife?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, last year when lockdown happened, and of course when schools closed, I mean that was definitely the worst time,
Mm-hmm.
And again, I know a lot of, some parents I've spoken to, a handful, a very tiny percentage have kind of talked about how much they kind of embraced and enjoyed the homeschooling aspect. And obviously, like most parents, we did try to, make the most of this
Right.
special time. But the reality was not that. And regardless of kind of tensions within the home, it was more just the fact that children need to be around their friends. They need that stimulation. They need
Mm-hmm.
also we ran our business from home, so we were in the throes of a panic of is our business going to survive? Or, I mean, and certainly and that's the magazine side of the business. The comedy business was had completely kind of overnight disappeared. So
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of having to have these very panicked, frantic. Um, can we save this? What's going to happen? How do we kind of salvage something from this mess?
Mm-hmm.
Meetings with children in the house who need stimulation. We're being told by the government that we need to be teaching them. Um,
Right.
so that was a tricky period, and then of course, I mean, it's the children's mental health is of paramount
Huge.
concern
Yeah.
because when else in their lives would they be trapped in the house being told they can't do this, they can't see their friends. There were so many different things to contend with. So
Mm-hmm.
right now, again, we hear this a lot, but we are very blessed to live in a part of the world where
Right.
things we're not in total lockdown. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
we are. There are many restrictions right now, but one of them, say the kids are at school. Yes, they're wearing masks all day, but they don't complain about that. They're just
Mm-hmm.
happy to be there with their friends, and most importantly, they get to play hockey. One son has a hockey
Nice.
match tonight. Hockey practice tomorrow morning.
Wow.
So I mean, I can't imagine there's many places in the world where children's sports activities are still taking place.
It is
Um,
it is such an interesting thing, I know, and I actually really enjoy hearing about kids' experiences through all of this because it's so easy for us to say that this is this crazy thing because it's broken our norm down to pieces. But I find that kids are adapting to it, especially around here, pretty well because granted, they don't have to do this full lockdown. It's this half lockdown, and they just have to wear a mask, and that's something that's being introduced to them at a young age. It is very interesting to see how they adapt.
True, very true, and they're really not. They didn't complain then
Hmm.
much. They're not coming. It's teenagers and late teenagers that I feel most sorry for because, and even your age demographic as well. Like because this is without wanting to be too downbeat. This is like the best time. That's what you're living in right now is the best time.
Hmm.
Like it's all downhill from, and all of the things that keep me going right now in life, throughout my 30s, 40s, and then I'm
Hmm.
sure my 50s, which is around the corner, is remembering those great times I had in my
Right.
and of course, they weren't all great, but in theory, those are the kind of the most fun times, and
Hmm.
it is mortifying that for that generation that they are being forced to stay inside. Again, it's as I say, it's one thing for 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds.
Mhm.
But the age when you should be out socializing and should be out having fun. That's a real shame.
It is definitely a interesting transition to make. I know that, granted, I have a mental health podcast. Spending time with myself, not my particular favorite thing to do,
Right.
and so my social life was this kind of this pillar of my mental health, this support system that I had, and so to have that kind of be stripped away, it has been an interesting transition. I guess the light at the end of the tunnel for me is I'm really hoping for this roaring 20s vibe, that once all this is done, that everyone will want to see the world and experience new things, and it'll just be just a blast.
That's a very good point. Yes, and I hadn't thought of that because I mean I talk a lot about the fact that at the start of the last year we were all talking about the Roaring Twenties is going to
Right.
be great, and of course it turned out to be a terrible year. But
Mhm.
then the reason the Roaring Twenties were the Roaring Twenties a century ago was after huge strife. So yes,
Mhm.
maybe what's going to come back. I mean, one of the things that was happening in England, for example, and certain teenagers and 20-somethings were organising was illegal raves came back during
Mm.
the lockdowns, which of course I'm not condoning that, but
Right.
interestingly, a lot of kind of very highfalutin broadsheet newspapers in England were kind of giving it a bit of like, yeah, go
Yeah.
youth, like, and so yeah, I mean, it will be interesting. I think yes, coming out the other end, it could kind of bring about everyone embracing fun more,
Yeah.
and an emphasis on fun,
Mhm.
which can only be a good thing.
Well, and I think it's going to be one of those things that I would love to see people start living like Maritimers a little bit more.
Yes.
This sense of community and being there for one another and really coming together. I know I was having a very interesting conversation with my parents the other night because they are huge proponents for when this is all done, pack a backpack, go to Europe for 2 months, see the world. And I'm lucky to have that kind of support in my life. But also, having them talk about how much they miss the curling rink and how much they miss, the
Yes.
poker nights and going for these or the poker runs and that kind of stuff. It's so I hope that people really start to embrace how much I feel like there's a ton of tension in the world, and it would be so nice to see people really bring back a sense of community as the 20s progress.
I couldn't agree more, and it means it's definitely going to. We're already seeing a kind of embracing of this kind of community-driven and somewhat rural living that we live in, and that
Hmm.
we already embraced. I mean, certainly. I mean, it's funny speaking to friends in London who are working from home, have been for 8 months. They've been
Hmm.
told they're going to be working for another 6 months at the very least. So you've got these people working jobs which traditionally were jobs where it was absolutely required to be in the office.
Right.
And of course, the reason that these friends of mine in their 40s and 50s live in the most expensive city in the world in a shoebox the size of most people's garages in New
Right.
Brunswick. The reason they lived in those places is because A, their jobs were there, and
Hmm.
B, because London's a great place to live if you like doing stuff every
Right.
night.
Yeah.
When you remove everything, when you remove every single activity,
Yeah.
excursion, museum, art gallery, theatre, when you remove everything, every
Hmm.
pub, restaurant, bar, to live in London or indeed any big city, New York, Toronto,
Hmm.
utterly ludicrous.
Yeah. Miserable.
So absolutely miserable. So
Hmm.
most of them now, having just been given the news that they're going to be at home for another 6 months,
Oh.
are moving out to the countryside.
Yeah.
So it is going to be interesting, as you say, seeing people wanting to embrace that kind of lifestyle, but also, like you say, get out and explore. I mean, I was going to ask you mentioned then obviously about um, uh, people's mental health during
Hmm.
that period was of paramount concern to the likes of us, but yet it was
Yeah.
very being talked about very little by governments in any
Yeah.
country. There was all the doom on one thing, but very little thought. How quickly did the industry transition into kind of virtual therapy, and how was it for you? Like when March happened and you
Hmm.
learned that you weren't going to be able to necessarily go and visit a therapist on a weekly basis, how quickly
Yeah.
did that happen?
It's a great question. I was really fortunate that the doctor that I was working with before I left Toronto, he continued to see me through monthly phone calls.
Wow.
And we had built this. He was a young doctor. I think he was just approaching his 30s, or was early in his 30s. So, fresh out of residency, was working at the university. And we developed definitely, and I don't know if it was the Maritimer in me or not, but we developed a bit of a kinship, and
Nice.
we were able to keep in touch. And now we touch base about sports, we touch base about everything, because I think that this pandemic really showed that it's so easy just to discount somebody as just a doctor and not look at them as another person who's going through the exact same thing you are. And so we had a great opportunity to really get to know each other pretty well, because of the fact that these monthly calls were an opportunity for two guys in their 20s to shoot the shit about what was going on in their life.
Nice.
And I think that one thing that's interesting about the mental health industry is some people are very hesitant about being in person. And so the network was already very well established to handle people doing online therapies.
Interesting.
Yeah, because
That's
I mean, some
amazing.
people want to do therapy but aren't comfortable sitting one-on-one with somebody outside of a zone that they're comfortable in.
Right.
And so, people were already doing a lot of at-home therapies. And I think that it definitely, there was this uptick in need, but it is, like you said, we're going through this pandemic, but there's also a mental health pandemic going on right now.
Absolutely.
And it's being, I think, overwhelmingly discounted, because it's just kind of that, come on, guys, hunker down and we'll be fine in 6 months. That's not a big
Yeah,
deal.
we're
But
all in it together.
oh
So,
God,
so your mental health that doesn't matter because we're in it together. And
exactly,
I mean,
exactly.
and it's funny that phrase "we're all in it together" is for, and I know people mostly mean well, but it is what possibly one of the most insulting things, especially because it's never posted by anyone other than someone with, who's at home working, they've still got their job or got full-time benefits or full salary.
Yeah,
I mean, and of course, it's lovely if it's very important for people to be there for people, but
absolutely.
you can't just tweet "we're in it together" and walk away and go, "My work here is done."
Exactly, and I think and it's so paramount at the provincial level, because you do see all these people in positions of leadership, and I understand, and I completely get, again, talking about that's another person. They have a lot on their plate. They're trying to handle a global pandemic. That's a lot, but I mean, to just kind of try to brush these things under the rug and just kind of say like, hey, here's the distraction over here. Don't look at the wizard behind the curtain.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, it's terrible, and I really do hope that we start to see that how important this all is, because from kids to adults, everybody is going through the same thing, but not everybody's situation is the exact same. I understand that I speak from a place of incredible privilege, that both my parents were government employees. And when I moved home, neither of them lost their jobs. We always had food on the table and a roof over our heads, but that's not the case for some people.
Right, that's
And
exactly.
and to just discount that by saying, "Hey, you're going through the same thing I'm going through," it's like, no, that's not true. And people do need extra support right now, and it needs to be more personable, for sure.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree.
Yeah. Speaking of that, that kind of maritime attitude towards things, what drove the move for you to move out of the UK and to come here to St. John?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's obviously it's something that I got asked a lot when we moved here. Often in a very strange way. Like often people wouldn't ask it in the polite, thoughtful way you did, and again, not because they meant it. But the way we would always get asked is why the hell would you move here?
Right,
And
right.
and, and we would always be like, well, it's such a strange way to ask that, and I know what people what they meant by it, but I always at the same time would say, well, why wouldn't you? I mean, look around.
Yeah.
This place is so much to offer. My wife grew up here. She had been away for many, many years. She grew up on the Kingston Peninsula, just outside St. John. At 17, 18, she moved to Toronto, worked there for 6 years, then moved to London, and then she was in London for 15, 16 years. So we had met in London, actually in the year 2000, started dating. I'd visited New Brunswick that year. At that time, in my early 20s, fell in love with this place as a haven, as the place that I would want to come and retire or write a book or all of these things. It wasn't kind of top of mind to me as a place that I would necessarily come and live. Partly because, to be honest, I mean, when we would come and visit, we were mostly on the peninsula, so it wasn't like I was experiencing the St. John nightlife or indeed any of those kind of things. It was very much a family trip. But then it was many years later, 13 years later, and I remember the moment that it kind of finally dawned on us that this was the move. And it was summertime of 2013. We were living in the same house we'd been in for a few years in Tooting in South London. And we had one child. He was 2, and we had a second on the way. And we were sat there basically just kind of looking at our lives, something that we always did, and trying to work out what our next step was going to be. We'd both worked for the same companies for many years. I'd been doing stand-up at that point for over 10 years. I'd been working for the same magazine for about 13 years. She'd been working for the same magazine for about the same time.
Just a small magazine called GQ, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'd basically gone there straight out of university. Like, I'd gone there for 1 week's work experience. One week's work experience turned into 2 weeks, and I treated it the same way anyone should treat any internship, which is I kind of went in and made it so that I just wanted to make myself invaluable. I wasn't willing to take my kind of foot out the door. I wanted to and just kind of grafted and ended up staying there for all those years. What we realized at this point that summer, but before we moved, was that basically our lives were not going to change. We weren't going to suddenly have a house with a normal sized garden. We had a standard London garden. It was the size of basically this area I'm sitting in here. Our jobs weren't going to change. We were always going to be working stupid hours. I was going to be performing stand-up every night of the week, traveling all over the country. We weren't going to see each other. Our quality of life wasn't going to improve, basically. And over the years, we'd toyed with various different moves. We'd toyed with moving to Toronto. We'd toyed with moving to New York. But at this particular time, I suddenly said, well, what about St. John? And I think she thought I was mad at first, and then we started thinking about it. And I guess part of the reason was, and I've joked about this in the past, moving here because parents are from here, which means free childcare on tap. But and that was always said in jest. But to be honest, I mean, the reality was that my GQ salary paid for childcare. That's how expensive childcare was in London. My entire salary went on childcare. So I'm doing this kind of fairly high stress, high pressure job for 10 hours a day, and then traipsing around the country, sleeping on train platforms, doing stand-up, because stand-up was... So basically, I'm working for GQ for free just to pay a stranger to be with the little person that I wanted to be with, and then traveling around just so that there's some food to put on the table. And so it was this ridiculous cycle of exhaustion. And then with the second on the way, we realized, well... And so the thought process was, come here. Pam knew that she could continue working for the magazine that she'd been working for in England. I didn't know, and I'd certainly been told by people that I wouldn't be able to carry on working as a stand-up comedian here. So the thought was we would come here, and then I would maybe go back to England every few weeks, do some shows, and come back, because the cost of living here would be so low, and with the childcare, that would be... So basically, London is so expensive to live in that it is cheaper to move to New Brunswick and commute.
That is wild to think about, that you would just hop on a plane, like the same way that somebody would hop on a bus.
Exactly.
That's crazy
the
to me.
same way. And to be honest, some people's commutes into work, into London in the morning from the English countryside is about the same time. I mean, those flights from Halifax that took 5.5 hours to get to London when flights were a thing. Some people take a 3-hour train, which ends up taking 5 hours anyway. So that was. I was also fully prepared to give up stand-up just to be able to give my children this kind of upbringing. I didn't want them growing up in...
Well, it sounds like a lot of stress on you to have to make that decision.
Well, yeah, and it definitely was, and it was the decision that we made easily, I think. But then the knock-on effect of that, I definitely went off the rails a bit in my last few months being in London, feeling like this was the end. Like there was definitely this kind of this feeling of like I don't know if it was necessarily a feeling of failure, but it was but I guess in an element, in a way, it was that feeling of failure. It was it was like we couldn't cope, and we couldn't make that work. And there is something slightly selfish about. I guess it's that point. There's something slightly selfish about creative jobs when
Absolutely.
you decide to become a parent, especially.
Right,
But yes, there
right.
are. I mean, but yeah. I mean, creative jobs are selfish because you're basically doing a job that you want to be pursuing, which is noble and absolutely acceptable. But what I didn't want to be was one of those people who, because they want to be a comedian or because they want to be a writer, their family has to suffer
Right.
because they're going to keep chasing this impossible dream. That I didn't want to be. And again, each to their own. But I have, obviously in my life, I've obviously met people for whom put their families through hell because they refuse to get a job that would put some food on the table because I want to travel for 12 hours to do a gig to 12 people for chicken wings, and I will eat those chicken wings and I will party all night and then I will go back with nothing. I've met those people, and and again, each to their own, but I didn't want my family to suffer for my art, so to speak.
Right.
So coming here was very much like I would give the family the quality of life. If I can carry on doing stand up, even if it just became a hobby or an occasional thing, then that's it. I certainly never expected it to become even more of a job here than it was back in the UK.
Well, the funny thing is, I feel like you filled this very interesting need because you've talked about in your stand-up before that people told you that, you can't do comedy on the East Coast.
Right.
But it's so funny to me because as somebody who was raised here, I think that comedy in the East Coast should be, and I obviously through the success that you've seen are so linked because Maritimers love to tell stories. They love to laugh. They love to come together. And that's what comedy is. So I'm surprised that people planted that seed in your head. Was there like what were the feelings when people were telling you this? Like, was it doubt? Was it like, I don't know if this is going to maybe be the right decision?
Good question. And I guess it was only, and of course, I guess the important thing is it was some people. I guess prior to coming here, and the people I was meeting here were people that weren't necessarily in creative fields, And again, I mean, I guess to them it sounded ludicrous. So if I'm meeting, relatives of my wife's even, and I guess for them, they're looking out for their daughter and their grandchildren.
Of course,
and I'm not saying it was definitely my in-laws that were saying this, although I'm just basically
this crazy man wants to pursue comedy.
But I guess for them, they're kind of looking out for them and saying, well, if you really think you can come in here and carry on where you've left off in England, think again. And that's true. I mean, I did have to start again at the bottom. I didn't come in here with any contacts, any favors, any grace. I came in with nothing and had to build up my business, which is one of the things that I like about this place. The Maritimes as a whole and Atlantic Canada as a whole is they are, contrary to what people think, open to new ideas, especially because there isn't a well-worn path. So it was the main people that said that it wouldn't work, to be honest, were my friends in the business in Toronto and Montreal.
Right.
And the previous summer, so July 2013, I was in Montreal at Just for Laughs with friends of mine who work for the festival and other comedians, and I was telling people my plan was the following year I'm moving to New Brunswick and people were kind of like, oh, well, and some people tried to be nice. Some people said you are insane.
Right,
they were like, it's hard enough to make a living as a comedian in Toronto. In New Brunswick, you've got absolutely no chance. And of course, what they were ignoring, and I've joked about this before, but it seems very weird to me that people would say that, given, you wouldn't say to a plumber, there's no plumbers on the East Coast, so don't go there. If there's no plumbers, there's a lot of toilets that need unblocking. So, I see myself as the toilet unblocker of comedy. Like, if you go to a place and it isn't a thing, go there. And so it kind of meant that I basically built my business up the same way a plumber or a contractor would, which was I got here, did every gig I could, whether it be in a high school, a church, a basement, a vineyard, wherever, and if people like it, they'll come again, and if they don't like it, they won't come again. I mean, so it was the most natural, organic approach. So, which to me, I mean, of course, all comedy is subjective. Some people like what I do, some people hate what I do.
Right.
But it doesn't matter, because if the people that like it enough to come again, well, that's the box ticked. It's not like in bigger cities like Toronto, but to an extent, but mainly I'm talking about kind of London and LA and places where performers can be forced upon people, whereby a manager represents a big name artist. Someone wants that big name artist on their chat show. Well, if you want this person, you need to give my new comedian a 5-minute stand-up spot on your show.
Right.
That performer is not earning that spot. That performer is not earning that spot in your living room when you tune in. What I like about doing this job here is that for the most part, and some people would possibly disagree if they don't like me and they've accidentally chanced across my stuff on Facebook and they think, oh, I wish this guy would go away. But for the most part, what I do is I perform to people who are there to see me.
Right.
And that's what I like. I like, I've had opportunities, for example, I've had offers to do radio things here now, and the reason I've kind of shied away from it is that I don't ever want to be doing something where I'm forcing what I do on someone. Someone's at work, someone's on the bus, someone's partly because I think as someone that is very insecure and riddled with self-loathing, I can't take the abuse. Possibly, I don't know what it is. But mainly it's I like. I don't want to be forcing what I do on anyone else. So that's why I've always kind of shied away from doing any kind of TV work or radio work where someone is at work and the radio's on and it's like, oh God, there's that,
Right.
No, I'd rather be performing to people that actually go, oh, I like what he does. I will go to a show. They're there by choice as opposed to being forced to.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I think that what I've seen through my experiences of growing up here, I was born in Ontario, moved here at a young age, was raised here. And speaking of that raised comment, I think that something that, that kind of ties in what you just said, is the idea that I feel like what the East Coast does that a lot of places don't do in the world is it doesn't matter when you move here, it has this weird element of nurturing your growth and putting you in front of the right people. And I think that that's interesting that you've kind of seen that with your stand-up. I've seen that with my podcast. People do really appreciate when you go out on that limb and then again, showing the fact that you love the East Coast. What would you say you kind of, because obviously you've talked pretty openly about the fact that when you were in London, your mental health wasn't very good. And then coming here, things started to improve. So I'm curious, like, what you found here in the Maritimes that improved how you felt in general.
It's an excellent question. I mean, you mentioned the people there, and I think that's a very, very important thing. Is the people here are obviously extremely welcoming and kind of famed for it. And obviously, I mean, Canadians full stop are. I mean, my first few visits to Canada in my life were to Toronto, which again I found extremely friendly compared to England. But of course, the stereotype is that Toronto people aren't friendly.
Right.
Well, I mean, compared to New Brunswickers, they might not be, but compared to Londoners, they are the friendliest people in the world. And you're right. I think East Coasters are very amenable to nurture people, both people from away and people here. One thing that East Coasters do have to learn to do is to ask for things, to ask for help, to ask for support. One of the things that I think is drilled into people's heads in bigger cities is, go after things, ask for things. Whenever I've come across people who have felt despondent or alone or unsupported by the powers that be, whether it be a creative field or an entrepreneurial field, invariably the one thing that I always come across is they haven't actually asked anyone. They've sat at home getting angry about other people's opportunities and other people doing things, but they haven't actually asked. And it's one of the things that I've come across it with comedians who I have kind of eventually met or seen at a show, and then they kind of tell me, I used to hate you because you never asked me to open for you. And I was like, well, Write to me.
Yeah,
I could
yeah,
not be
yeah.
more. I'm surprised. I mean, and to me, nothing in my life has landed on my lap. Every single thing I've
Hmm.
had to ask for. I mean, even now, I've been doing. I've been in the magazine business for almost 2 decades. Comedy business, almost the same. Of the things I do, none of them come to me. Like they're
Hmm.
all like I probably send 200 emails a day to procure work in one way or another.
Right.
Two of those 200 may turn into something.
Right. Yeah.
When someone says to me, how did you get on the debaters? Well, how do you think I got on the debaters? I wrote to the producer and the host 50 million times and pitched 1,000 ideas, and then eventually I wore them down. And eventually, that's how you have to do. That's how you have to do things. It doesn't. I mean, and I say this because I am someone that used to sit in a bedroom alone, getting upset and angry about other people getting opportunities and me not. Before I kind of realised that was the way. But sorry, I didn't. I haven't quite answered your question. To answer, which I think was when did I realise and why this place made me? I think the place that I knew I was coming here because of what you have here in terms of obviously natural beauty and obviously cost of living being significantly less, thus reducing that amount of kind of stress day to day. The outside space, the people. There was a line in the Sopranos that was uttered by Tony. And people don't normally quote. Well, I guess Tony Soprano was in therapy, but people don't normally quote Tony Soprano in a positive way. Now, interestingly, I'm about to argue the opposite. But the line that he uttered was to the I believe it was to the wife of Vito after he'd killed Vito. As to why he couldn't help relocate you. And he said there isn't a geographical solution to an emotional problem. Now, that was, of course, Tony Soprano, as always, manipulating mental health in order to get out of paying for something or manipulating another human being. However, I am of the opinion that and again, you can, and everyone is different, and you can never say that one thing works for everyone. I find and find that in some ways there is a geographical solution to an emotional problem if a place and the people there are bringing you down, in whatever capacity that is. Now, and again, that isn't to say that I never felt I felt supported in London and by my family. I felt supported by colleagues and the people I worked with. But the grind of the place, the expense of the place, the crowds, being packed into a tube train every single morning like this with 3 or 4 strangers' bodies, which now with COVID seems even more
Just ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. Like you go months, if not years, in New Brunswick without making physical contact with another human being in normal, unless you're choosing to, in normal times.
Right.
And in London, just the thought that in a day I would have 100 strangers' bodies all over me at various different times. All of the stress and that whole mindset of life of when's the deadline, last week, when do you need it, yesterday. Now, don't get me wrong, I've now coming here and trying to do business here, I have a slightly different outlook of like, it'd be nice if it happened some bloody time.
Right.
And so I think Londoners could learn a lot from Maritimers. I think Maritimers could learn a bit about meeting deadlines but all of that said, all of those things were stressing me out. Certainly not making me happy. Certainly making me. Never ever finding time to exercise or go to the gym. Definitely drinking too much. All of those aspects were not positive, and in life, it's important to know when you're going down a slippery path.
Yeah. Did it take you a while to find that, to realize when you were on that slippery path?
I think I knew that I was on it, and like most of us, kind of have these kind of ebbs and flows and dips, and but I guess both my wife and I, we're very lucky to have the kind of relationship where. I mean, the fact that we're able to kind of make these decisions together at the same time and realize that changes need to happen, and also to work together and run a business together is incredible that we, and it's interesting. I mean, and again, I don't just admire her as a mother and a wife. I admire her as a business person. Like, I can't think of anyone else in the world that I would rather do business with.
It's amazing.
But did it take me a while to realize? I'm just trying to think. I mean, I guess it did, but I guess we did realize at the right time. I mean, one of the things that Pam said to me that day in the garden when we realized we needed to make the change and we decided on the St. John move was she said, if we don't do this, in 10 years, we're going to be sat in this spot and nothing will have changed. And we'll be saying 10 years ago, we should have done this move.
Right.
And it's now 7 years since that. And I mean, of course, we didn't know at that time that a year later England was going to collapse under Brexit. We didn't know that there was going to be a pandemic. I mean, we really could not have picked a better time. But even if Brexit hadn't happened, even if a global pandemic hadn't have happened, this would still have felt like the right move. But so for me, there was a geographical solution to the emotional problem, and that isn't to say that coming to a new place, because they say the most stressful thing in life is moving house, changing jobs, having a baby. Now we did all three of those things, plus factored in leaving my family behind, leaving one of my friends behind. I'd spent years building up a magazine career that was finally it was 13 years building it up to be in a position where I was able to interview people like Jerry Seinfeld. I'd finally built up my stand-up career to a point where I was able to tour solo. I'd built it up, and then walk away from it all and come to a new place and start from scratch. Some stresses were taken away, but definitely new ones were added. And then there's the fact that in England, you're constantly around people, which can provide stress, but it can also provide respite. So you come here, you build up a career from scratch as a comedian, and then suddenly, when you do have dark days, I can't just nip to the pub to meet my old school friends. That was the other thing. I was very blessed in London to have all of my two oldest school friends. We all worked in central London. I mean, the dream that we kind of set out for ourselves at the age of 11 kind of panned out. That, I mean, for the most part, if one of us was having a dark day, you could text and you could be in the pub in 5 minutes. I'm suddenly here without that kind of support network, but also have built myself up as the happy-go-lucky guy. So I haven't got my support network, but I need to be on more, because suddenly, in a smaller place where everyone knows everyone, you can't be walking around sober, looking at how you might be feeling.
Right. Yeah. Do you feel like people have a tough time in a place that is as close knit as St. John and New Brunswick? Do you feel like people have trouble differentiating James Mullinger, the person, who, we all have our own struggles, from James Mullinger, the comedian?
I don't know if they do. I think that's more my problem than theirs. But also, I don't think they do for two reasons. I mean, one, let's face it, most people would have seen me ambling around Sobers way more than they've probably seen me on stage. And the other wonderful thing in a place like this is, I mean, there's no such thing really as being well known or in New Brunswick, because everyone's known for something. It's like, well, that's, I mean, invariably, like, the kind of comments that people say to me after gigs is someone will come up and go, oh, I'm your wife's Uncle Paul changed my septic tank, right? And Uncle Paul is famed as being the septic tank guy,
right?
And someone else is famed for this. Everyone's kind of known for something. So I think people are most people are extremely amenable to that. Also, I think one of the things that's definitely changed in the last 10 years is podcasts and people talking about the craft of comedy, possibly too much. I personally don't. People say to me, "Oh, do you listen to Bill Burr's podcasts or Mark Moran's podcasts?" And mostly the answer is no, because the last thing I need is to hear more bloody comedians talking about bloody stand-up comedy and their bloody art. And I mean, some of the comedians definitely take themselves too seriously. Don't get me wrong.
Hmm.
Obviously, no one is more interested in the art of comedy than me. But I'm spending all day here writing books and books and books of notes, and in normal times going out every night trying to work out what's funny, what's not.
Right.
I am interested in the craft of it to an extent, but 3-4 hours of comedians talking about their crafts. But my point is that because of these podcasts and because of these interviews, I think 20 years ago, if you went to see a stand-up comedian perform, most of us thought, "Wow, this guy's making this comedian or this female comedian is making this stuff up as they go along." Whereas the reality is, they are, now everyone knows that it's a very kind of honed and structured thing.
Right.
And my stage persona is, I mean, obviously it's an extension of me, and because I'm not, most of what I talk about on stage also is real. Like inevitably, I'm taking a real story. I mean, all the time I'm writing. Something happened to me this morning, and I'm writing it into a stand-up routine. And now I'm gonna do that thing I just said I hated of comedians talking about there. But I'll write down something that happened, and then I'll go on stage. I'll turn up at an open mic night, and I'll record myself doing the bit. And then I'll transcribe exactly what I said, and then I'll highlight in red where the laughs were, and then I'll try and tighten up the bits between the laughs.
Right.
So
Interesting. Yeah.
all of those little things. But to answer your question, I find that. But yes, it is an interesting thing where if I'm out and someone is kind enough and lovely enough to want to come up and say hello, and that something's they've been to a show and it cheered them up for this reason, that reason. The reason that's lovely is that will get me out of whatever miserable mood I'm in. So,
Nice.
if anything, my therapy, in addition to this and you as my therapist and these things being extremely cathartic for me, nothing can get me out of a funk more than someone coming up and saying a nice thing, which is why, I mean, I try and do that.
Great.
My whole life with people. One of the things that I try and do and have always done, my mum, I wish I had it right here to show you. In fact, it's over there. My mum, I have a newspaper cutting over there of it's a picture of my mum in 1979 outside our house in Maidenhead in Berkshire, standing with all the in England they're called bin men, but I think they're called refuse collectors. And basically, I was 1 year old, and my mum was always cheered up every morning. She had this terrible, horrible child upstairs screaming. And every week, the bin men would turn up and flirt with her a bit and be a bit chatty, and they would cheer up my mum. So she, and this is something I've always tried to do, is tell people when you are appreciating something they do. When I read a book that I've enjoyed, I mean, I'm surrounded with books about St. John here. When I read a book I enjoy, I write to the author and say I enjoyed it. When someone's been Sonia at Starbucks on the East Side that cheers up everyone, or I will write to Starbucks and say your employee Sonia at Starbucks is making me happy and brightening my day. Julie at Cineplex makes me really happy whenever I go in there. All of these things. So I get this from my mum because I was 1 year old. The bin men would cheer her up, and she decided to write to the local newspaper. To tell them, and you know what the newspaper did? They sent them round, and there's a picture of my mum being lifted up by all the bin men.
Wow.
By the car. And
That's fantastic.
So, and I live with that thought that basically she had a 1 year old baby, she still found the time, despite all of that, to tell a person. So that's really what I try and do. And I think some people think I'm weird because often I will write to someone randomly. I will see something they've done, or I will see someone's daughter perform a high school talent show, and then I'll write to the parent and say, "Wow, your daughter was really, has a really amazing voice." I think people think I'm a bit weird, but I do it because those things brighten my day. So I want to do the same thing for other people.
Well, I think that's such an incredible exercise in gratefulness because, I mean, just to show people that the effort that they're putting in is not going unnoticed, and I just think that that's fantastic. And it's funny that you say that because I find that. You know, when I've watched a few of the Maritime Edit stories that you've done, you know, something that comes across so genuinely is your admiration for the people that you're talking to, and I think that that's so beautiful because in a world where everything is how can I make myself look as good as possible to hit that next rung in this grand scheme of things, you've done a really incredible job of really allowing people to shine when they're around you. And that's what something that after, and for anybody listening to this podcast, check out the Maritime Editor. It is absolutely
Thank you.
phenomenal. And yeah, it's just so, it's so great to see. And I definitely think that attitude, is something that people should be a little bit more thoughtful of, for sure.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, it's a two-pronged thing. I mean, on the one hand, as you say, when I'm talking to these people, whoever it is, whether it's someone that's volunteering at a charitable organization, through to Alan Doyle, the thing that I'm genuinely in awe of these people. I'm genuinely fascinated by them. Maritimers are not good at asking for help, and they're also not good at at showing off what they do. They're very humble, which is a wonderful, wonderful trait to have. But there needs to be, no one wants everyone here to be as arrogant as all of Toronto. No, I'm joking.
Any Toronto listeners, it's James Mullinger.
I'm Londoners. I should go.
Yeah.
London people, English people. No one wants. I mean, because at the end of the day, this is why it's quite a funny thing that people are always saying, we need to give children more self-esteem. Well, yes, we do, but at the same time, who has lots of self-esteem? Donald Trump has. So being humble and modest is a wonderful trait. And again, I mean, I often wish that I wasn't kind of riddled with insecurities and self-loathing, but equally, I would rather be up half the night with a little voice in my head reminding me of all the stupid things I've ever done and the embarrassing things I've ever done, than the opposite, and be someone who walks through life not worrying about that, because I've met those people and they are dicks. So that's and then I think the other thing, to answer your question, I guess one of the things that I'm constant, and again, this isn't necessarily top of mind when I am writing to people, and this is taking it to a very dark extreme, but we are all aware of the statistic, or the thing that is often talked about when it comes to mental health, about the well-timed phone call. The person who is and again, this isn't necessarily the case when I'm interviewing someone, but it is when I'm writing to someone or dropping something off, or whatever else. We're all aware of when someone is at their lowest ebb and their darkest time, the well-timed phone call, where basically, for want of a better phrase, when quite literally that is the thing that brings someone off a ledge.
Right.
We're all, any one of us that has struggled with things knows those moments when someone suddenly said something or did something that took you from here to here.
Right.
And that's something that we can all do.
Absolutely. And it's funny because, I think when you're talking about being, more, not quite as humble, still keeping yourself humble, but advocating for yourself, being a self-advocate. This is something that you've talked about as well, that you did from a young age. And so I kind of want to, backtrack a little bit in your life, and talk about when this self-advocacy became a thing, because as many people who have mental health issues, childhood's a tough thing because you're not necessarily taught what you're going through. You have to try to figure it out all yourself. So I'm curious, when you talk about self-advocacy, what does that mean, and how did comedy play a role in that for you?
Excellent question. I guess it's an interesting one, because to do stand-up, you obviously need to have there needs to be an aspect of confidence, obviously, ego, and it's a very weird job to do for people with confidence issues and self-esteem issues and self-loathing, all the rest of it. Yet almost everyone that does comedy has all of those things. There's a handful of comedians in the world that I would imagine don't have confidence issues. Dane Cook possibly being the only one.
Right.
And I think the thing is, the important thing to note about stand-up is that, of course, it isn't. It's a confidence trick, is what it is. It's very much a confidence trick. You are teaching yourself to act on stage like being up there is the most normal, natural thing in the world. Meanwhile, it's not. And of course, while we're up there, we're trying to act very calm and confident, but we're constantly spinning 30 different plates. Do I address what this person just said, or do I come back to this idea? All those things. So you do need them, but and certainly, I mean, when I was growing up, no, I wasn't the class clown. I wasn't the person that anyone would have imagined would have ended up doing this job. I wasn't.
Right.
I mean, I didn't really have much going to school. I wasn't academic. I wasn't athletic, and I certainly wasn't confident. I was kind of the triple bill of failure for my parents, if you will. It's good to have the full set going on. Normally, if you're
well-rounded, of course.
Yeah, well-rounded, exactly. Normally, if your child is failing everything in class, you can at least take some solace in the fact that they may be quite good on the football field or have a lot of friends. I was none of them, and and I was, shy to even speak to someone in my class. And again, I mean, I still have that to an extent in real life. I mean, a therapist did actually once explain this to me. I was kind of trying to ask why it was that I would, for example, if my wife in normal times, we have to keep saying that, in normal times, if my wife would say to me, we're going to a dinner party with people I didn't know, I would get extremely anxious about it and almost kind of start picking a fight. So I could kind of go, well, fuck you, I'm not going to your dinner party.
Right.
But just so I could
kind
of get out of it.
Self-sabotaging.
Yeah, and if I had a gig that night to 500 people, I mean, yes, I would be, if nervous is the word, but I would always be focused on it. I don't know if nerves necessarily, but I would be kind of looking forward to the gig. But a dinner party with 12 people would make me terrified. And the therapist once explained it as it's all about, in a stand-up show, you're in control. You know where you're going. You know what you're doing. You know where you're headed. You have it's a well-worn path for you. You've done this. In a dinner party, you have absolutely no control over the conversation, where it's going, what's going to happen, and that terrifies you. And that is as all great therapy does. That was absolutely bang on the money. It was absolutely spot on. So stand-up for me, like I'm a great believer that anyone can do stand-up, and this is and I know this for a fact because of the simple fact that I do it. Anyone can learn it in the same way anyone can learn. To me, I don't think I could ever learn doing. I can't even know what the right term is, but I could never do mechanic work. I can't imagine when I look at my father-in-law work on a car, I'm like in awe of the genius of that. I cannot imagine, but I also think that yes, probably if I went to school for 3 years to study it, maybe I would get the hang of it. Similarly with stand-up, I believe that anyone, if they are willing to go through the indignity of, and that's the weirdest thing about stand-up, is that it's generally people that get attracted to the job are people often with insecurity issues, but we choose this profession or this art form that involves us failing on stage in front of people over and over and over again, and the insecurity never goes, but you do start to learn the craft of doing it. And of course you need to then have some self-confidence to be able to promote yourself and push yourself. And certainly living here, where you don't have a publicist or a PR doing all the work, and you have to have the muster up the confidence to write to people and say, would you like to cover this thing that I'm doing, which is daunting and all the rest of it. But you almost have to pursue it. And I mean, certainly stand up has definitely helped me cope with things. In the obviously it's the greatest pleasure in the world to be able to go up and make people laugh and make a room full of people laugh, and it's a great buzz. And of course, there's no denying the huge amount of ego and arrogance goes into that concept of wanting a room full of people to laugh at your jokes, and the fact that you're willing to go through hell to get to the point that you are doing that. But I think it's so. The honest answer is that those things that you mentioned are very hard. They are difficult to reconcile, and it is something that I don't have the answers to in terms of reconciling the and I mean, it's a weird moment quite often. But when I'm building up to a show and I'm about to go on stage, or there is a process for me to get into the stage mindset. And I don't get nervous about the gigs now, unless I'm testing brand new material. But when I've honed that material, and I'm on a tour, and I'm doing night after night and after night in a theatre, same show every night. The thing I'm nervous about is always that I know that every night I walk out on stage and a switch clicks and I go into stage mode. It's something about the sound of the audience, and I'm very superstitious about things. people say to me, what are your pre-show rituals? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm twisting the top of a water bottle and then touching the cup. I don't know if there's a scene actually in the City on Fire CBC documentary where I'm about to play Homeschooling for the first time, and you'll see me, and I'm there like touching the. Normally, like it used to be a light switch, but now it's like at the top of a water bottle.
It's so funny you say that, because I've got one of my OCD things is I'm very tactile. I always have to be playing with stuff, and so whenever I do interviews, I always I've either got a pen under the table, or I've got ripped jeans on right now, and I'm playing with the rips, like the fray of the rips. And so I totally understand.
Yeah, and it's weird because it's that thing where I'll be in that moment that I didn't know they were capturing, where I'm filling with the bottle top. It's that weird thing when I'm like, okay, well that's that I've done my final tap. I can go, and then I'm at this, and then the host is up there, eventually introduce me, and so I'm about to get into mode, and then of course the voice says, you need to touch it on that side of your
yeah.
And then you're like, well, I've there's 5,000 people there waiting to see me, and the voice is like, well, it'd be a shame if they booed you off. Like,
right.
Really, you can't just go back and just touch. You can't just do that. Well, is it really? And this could be ridiculous. This could just be a made-up voice.
I'd say it's almost
really
always
worth,
ridiculous.
Yes, always there. But the voice is saying, is it really worth risking being booed off stage in front of all those cameras and 5,000 people? You've got to live in this city. You've got to live here.
Right.
And then everyone's going to know you got booed off just because you couldn't. I'm like, okay, and I run back
I'll do it.
Yeah.
It's that is probably the most relatable thing I've ever heard from a guest I've had on this podcast, because that is so true in my own life. In the smallest things, it's I think you forgot to say I love you to your parents this morning. Whew. Well, see you later. Never going to see them again. And you're like, what? All right, I guess I'll make a phone call.
It is the craziest thing, and I've had it for as long as I can remember. I mean, certainly since the age of 11. So 31 years. And what's hilarious about it is that occasionally you will not put on the sock that way, or not put on the odd socks like the voice is telling you on, or occasionally you will not do the 3rd or 4th or 50th tap or finger roll across the surface or the brick or whatever it is, right? And nothing happens. But and again, this is a dark, but sometime in our lives, you or I, Carl, at some point, this is going to happen. 5 years, 10 years, where we're not going to do it, and that day something terrible is going to happen, and our first thought is not going to be, oh no, my whole family burned to the ground, and we're going to go, I knew it.
Yeah. I've been telling you guys for years.
Yes, it is all because I didn't touch them. Right. So I'm just trying to remember if I answered the question.
And if you don't mind me hopping in here real quick, it's funny because I was just kind of thinking that I think a lot of that comes from the fact that when you're dealing with mental health issues, you're drawn so much into your head that it's kind of like you really do start to believe that you are in control of the universe. And that is a very scary thing to believe, that, okay, well, now that since I am so living in my head, this is the only thing that I can really perceive. So now, okay, if my brain's telling me, hey, you've got to play with the business card here for a while you're talking, or something terrible is going to happen, you're thinking, well, I live in my head 99% of the time, so that must be true. So it's very interesting, yeah.
That's exactly it, and it's the weird thing where when I'm about to walk out on stage, I'm not worried about the material or anything else. What I'm worried about is, what if the switch doesn't flick, the switch where I turn from this into stage me.
Yeah.
And by that I mean a person who isn't scared of talking to 1 or 10 or 5,000 people.
Right.
What if the switch is... And so the fear is, what if this loser ends up on that stage? And I'm like, oh, hi. And I don't go into... And it's why I'm also very particular about my walk-on music, because there's a walk-on track that gets me... And sometimes when I'm having a bad time, or I've been, or even if I've had if I've had a bad gig, and the next day I'm thinking I don't know why finally the world's cottoned onto me. I'm a fraud. I'm not a comedian. I can't believe I thought I was, and I need to get myself geared up for that night. And I'll sit in my hotel and watching other stand-up videos of previous shows, going, well, that went well. Maybe I basically need to. So my nerves is always, what if, and every night, it's fine. I walk out, something switch. I go into this mode, and it's why I often tape record shows. And I mean, I'm supposed to be obviously on a tour right now, and I'm listening to audio from. Luckily, in September, I was able to do some shows at Punchlines Comedy Club in St. John.
Very cool.
And again, I went out there with 40 minutes of material and came off stage now and 20 minutes later. And then I listened to the audio, and I'm like, stuff's coming out of my mouth that I don't remember thinking, don't remember saying, don't remember the moment, and I don't know where that stuff comes from. So it's almost like
James, it is actually incredible hearing you say all this kind of stuff, because it's so true. I'll stop recording podcasts sometimes, and I take a few steps back, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't remember asking anything.
right.
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah, it's like an hour conversation can end, and you'll be like, what did we talk about? But yeah, it's,
yeah, and then I know, and then it is funny you talked about that switch, because I've noticed that lately, and this is, I think, a credit to coming home. This is a credit to focusing on my mental health. But I don't really have the mental fog anymore, which was something that I very much felt was holding me back in life. And I felt very sharp, and I love talking to people. It's one of the truest joys of my life. And so I always would get worried about, I'm not going to get the most out of this. And I think even today I've got this interview, and then I've got an interview in about an hour.
Nice.
And so I've got 2 interviews today, and I was really worried about not feeling that sharpness, because I spent so long not feeling that excitement, that sharp, that always thinking, that I was like, okay, I've got to make sure that I have to have my coffee, I have to make sure I read my book, I have to exercise, I have to do all these things, this list of things, so that I'll put myself in this best position to be that sharpness that I've grown to love so much. So
that's it.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It's all those boxes you need to tick to get into the groove, and it's weird how anxious you can get about doing things that you've done a million times.
Yeah.
And and it's interesting, because part of the reason why we can do what we do to any level, to any kind of level of success, is because we do it's because we care. Like, and again, there's obviously instances where the anxiousness becomes a negative thing, but at the same time, I am glad that I care. I'm glad that I worry. I'm glad that I wake up stressed about the things I have to do, because back when I was at university and happy to wake up and sit and watch daytime TV and smoke bongs all day and not stress about what I was going to do in my life. I know that all of the things that consume me now and make me anxious are the things that make me productive. Now, there are times that I wish I could relax a bit and take some downtime, but equally,
absolutely,
I know that the racing around the place, trying to do all these things in a day, are what keeps me sane, essentially.
I've got 2 more questions for you, James, if you've got the time.
Of course, yeah.
And this has been, I really do want to thank you, because this has been absolutely incredible. From the time I saw your stand-up, I was very much looking forward to hopefully, getting you on a call. So thank you, truly.
No, well, it's so kind, and I will just say thank you so much for doing this. And I've as I say, I've listened to many of your podcasts. Love what you do.
Thank you.
And thank you for doing this for the community. Thank you for doing it for yourself as well, because I'm so happy to hear that it's been cathartic for you. But it's been very cathartic for me today. And your face is now something I associate with feeling good about
that's amazing.
The world and life. So
I appreciate that. That really means a lot. Thank you. So I guess the question that I like to end off on for any guest that I have is, I like to give it a challenge to my listeners, something that they can implement into their day or their week, their month, or the rest of their life, something that you have learned through your lived experience that has made your life better. And I would love to know, if you were going to put forth a challenge for the people who are going to listen to this podcast, what it would be.
Excellent question. I love being challenged and asked things on the spot like this. And I will say, it goes back to something we were talking about. So a bit of a callback. I would give everyone the challenge to tell 10 people. Don't tell your kids that you love them, because I'm hoping if you're listening to this podcast, if you are a fan of Kyle's work, I would assume you are the kind of person that already tells those around you that you love them. I also don't always think it's right when people. I like doing that pay it forward thing. I like it when I'm in the Tim's drive-thru. I'll pay for the
Yeah.
but then I also do always think it's wrong when again, people are hashtagging, tweeting, telling people what to do, telling people that they need to be spending money when people might not have that money to spend. But the one thing that we can all do is tell 10 strangers that we like something that they're doing. And that could be writing to, Sonia at Starbucks' boss to tell her. It could be telling Julia at Cineplex's boss, or it could be telling Julia herself. It could be telling, the friendly people that you're seeing every day at Superstore or Sobeys or at Second Cup or the lovely people at Indigo. Tell them tell them something that you love. Don't nothing generic. Just like it doesn't have to be. Do whatever you want. But my challenge would be find something specific to tell someone that you're enjoying about what they're doing. It could even be an artist whose painting you've seen in your dental surgery, and you see that painting all the time, and you think, I couldn't necessarily buy that painting, but I would like to. You can see the artist's name. Write to them. Pick an independent business. That's literally what gets me through every day, and basically keeps the demons and the darkness at bay. Is always just telling people something that they're doing that is great, and it's good for them and it's good for you, and also you have no idea that it might be the proverbial well-timed phone call that person needs today. And think about the good things that person's also then going to do and how great they're going to feel.
Just kind of passing that along.
Yeah, exactly. Pay it forward without having to pay anything.
I love that. That's great. James, the last question I have to ask is, how can people interact with you, your brand? How can they follow the incredible work that you do?
Oh, well, that's very kind. Pretty much everywhere. And some people would say I'm too much all over social media, but I have a Facebook page, which is just facebook.com/James Mullinger Comedian, a YouTube channel, which I'm using a lot more now, thanks to the pandemic and producing lots of new content. I would implore people, that's James Mullinger Comedian as well, I think. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter just under my name, James Mullinger. It's one of the beauties of having a ridiculous surname that no one can pronounce or spell.
Kyle Moore was a tough one. That was everywhere.
You must have Kyle Moore 1, 2, 3, A, B,
exactly.
uppercase, lowercase, exclamation
couple
mark.
Underscores in there. That's phenomenal.
I have James Mullinger at hotmail.com, James Mullinger at gmail.com. Got all of them.
That's perfect.
So and I would say to anyone, reach out. I mean, one of the things that again I try to pride myself on is anyone that writes to me, I reply to. Anyone I can help, I will. I like to make myself available and reachable, and I always like a chat. So, and if you see me in Sobeys, come and say hi. It's one of those things. These eyebrows under a mask are very easy.
Expressive.
Exactly.
I'd say between the both of us, we probably have a couple kilometers worth of eyebrows.
Yes, we do. We basically, when we are allowed to do such things again, me and you need to dress up as the Gallagher brothers.
Done and done. I love it.
We've got it nailed. Yeah.
That's fantastic, James. Yeah, I'll definitely. You have to come back on the podcast because this has been an absolute blast. And best of luck with everything, and just keep doing what you're doing because it is incredible, and being an advocate for the people and the provinces of the East Coast, it's amazing. So thank you.
No, that's very kind, thank you. And actually, the other thing I'd implore people to do is also check out the Maritime Edit YouTube channel. We're producing films following entrepreneurs who've actually left other parts of the world and moved here to Atlantic Canada to set up shop. And we're trying to highlight all of these amazing men and women who've moved here from Syria, from Toronto, from the UK. And we want to highlight those people. So check me out there. But Kyle, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for getting in touch with me, and thank you for the extremely thoughtful questions, and for being for cheering me up today. I appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. I appreciate it.